All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. No matter where you are, I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Beacon House School System and welcome on this 13th edition of the World School of Tomorrow and the World of Tomorrow 2021 and beyond. We've been doing this since 2000, and this is the 13th edition, and it's all about engaging us in a conversation with local and global audiences to help and inform the direction of the organization, schools, and the society at large. My name is Kaiser, and I'm today your facilitator. And apart from facilitating this session, for which I'm truly honored, normally I run two companies. One is Engage Consulting, which is a leadership development organization in which I facilitate leadership development. And the second one is I'm the CEO of the Talent Games that actually uses artificial intelligence to assess candidates through games. Although we're not going to talk about games today, I think we're going to talk about significantly more important elements with regards to artificial intelligence in education. And therefore, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this third and fully virtual SOT event. So we've got three wonderful panel members today with us, specifically talking about unleashing the potential of artificial intelligence in education. This is the first time that the topic itself is being tabled, and I'm pretty sure that we've heard so much about artificial intelligence all around us that we really want to understand what that means for the profession that we're in. Three wonderful participants, Dr. Wayne Holmes, Mr. Ali Nomani, and Dr. Khurram Jamil. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, gentlemen. How are we doing?
Good morning, and good afternoon.
Fantastic.
Very well.
Well, let me first introduce all three guests, and then I'm going to ask them to start talking because it's all about them and not so much about me. So first of all, Dr. Wayne Holmes, he's an educationist, he's an author, he's a speaker, and he's earned his PhD from the University of Oxford. He's a lecturer and a lead in the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University on Artificial Intelligence in Education. The application of AI to both enhance and further understand learning and the ethical and social applications of AI applied in the educational contexts. He's co-authored 3 books, and he's also advising UNESCO on the pedagogical and ethical and social implications of AI in education. And he's doing this all around the world, from Brazil to Germany, from Japan to the US. Welcome, Dr. Wayne.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Khurram Jamil is the president of Strategic Initiatives, where he focuses on regional expansion, joint ventures and partnerships. He also oversees projects for all levels of education and training. His entrepreneurial experience extends more than 20 years, and he successfully led a number of teams comprising of medical profession and educational scientists. He spearheads large development partnerships and managed multi-million-dollar educational software development projects. He's also served as a doctor in health services. Good morning, Dr. Khurram.
Thank you. And I'm calling in from Denmark, Copenhagen. So
it's still morning, though, eh?
Yeah, it's late morning.
Just. Well, Ali, it looks that you and I are the only non-PhDs, or at least no doctors in this illustre company. Ali is the co-founder of Outclass, an edtech startup poised to change how children learn in Pakistan and other developing countries. He has taught and led the best private and public schools in Pakistan, as well as in the United States, and he's been a permanent visiting or mentor faculty in various programs at Harvard University, MIT, Boston College, and also LUMS. He's very passionate about sharing what's learned, and he counsels a lot of young entrepreneurs, students, and teachers. And he's also the only Pakistani to receive Harvard University's prestigious Urban Scholars Award for his Masters in School Leadership. Welcome, Ali. Good afternoon from Lahore.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we're the only. I'm based in Karachi, so it looks like we're the only ones who are Pakistani based, correct?
That's right.
and enjoying 40+ degrees.
Yes, that's also right.
Well, thank you very much. Let me ease us into this concept of artificial intelligence. Can I ask each one of you to share a personal example of an AI-driven application outside of education that has made your life easier? Khurram, can I start with you?
Yes, you can. So let me think of something that maybe is not directly something we would think of that everyone probably has tried to use, like Uber or Lyft. So I like to enjoy art and look at art as well. So there's an application called Artsy, and basically that helps, when you in the weekends want to enjoy and look at good artworks. It figures out and helps search artworks that I tend to be spending more time on, right? So it basically suggests artworks that I should also look at. And then there's obviously, if you start engaging with some of the artworks, there can be a human that actually connects with you. In this case, they try to sell you an artwork, but that's okay. You can, as a human, decide to say, I'm just viewing. But that's an application that I've enjoyed. And also an application that I've actually found fantastic artwork from my home country, Pakistan. I'm born in Denmark, but I enjoy Asian art, Southeast Asian art, and Middle Eastern art. So
fantastic. Sounds like the YouTube for more sophisticated viewers.
For example,
correct?
Yeah, for art lovers. Yeah.
Fantastic. Ali, what's an application that has made your life?
So I think that applications that have made my life easier with the use of artificial intelligence easily are Netflix and YouTube recommendations for what I should watch next. They're really good at keeping you hooked on. But something sort of more unique that people may not realize is based on artificial intelligence is this app called Duolingo. It's a language app, and I remember going to Mexico City and having my phone out there and just practicing constantly, and it would learn sort of what mistakes I was likely to make and give me feedback so I could correct them in the moment based on mistakes I had made in the past and things that I had gotten correct. So I really value it. I've learned a lot from it, and I wish I was still using it, but I might go back to it.
Thanks for sharing that, Ali. So how's your Spanish at the moment?
From it wavers between non-existent to terrible.
Thank you. So AI can still do a slightly better job, correct? Wayne, any application that you're using that makes your life easier?
Well, I'll just add to what Ali just said. I've been using Duolingo for 406 days to learn French. And to be honest, I find it quite difficult to find the AI in Duolingo. It's an extraordinary resource, but it's also quite weak in many respects. But that's another story. For me, it's not something that's personally affected me, but I think it's fascinating. There's been a lot of talk over recent years of predictive policing. So using AI to work out where crime is going to happen, Minority Report style. And then the police are sent there in order to ensure that the crimes do not happen. Now, the reality is that when you look at those maps, there's a huge correlation between the places it says the crimes will happen and places where poor people tend to live. But what I came across the other day, which I think is brilliant, is the equivalent, but for white-collar crime. So in other words, financial crime. So where do we expect financial crime to take place? And this is a map that's based on AI and financial crime data across the US. I thought that was fascinating.
Any hints on where it was pinpointing towards, Wayne?
Wall Street. Essentially.
Not surprising.
In Manhattan, anyway. Yeah.
Thank you for giving that example. I think that is a fascinating piece, and I think in your explanation you've already touched on 2 or 3 things that I would like to us to come back to. One is, of course, the inherent bias that is associated with artificial intelligence, and the other bit is where I would like to start, which is that almost every website from anybody that tries to sell something today claims that they are associated with AI or that they're working with AI. But if you look under the hood, there's almost nothing that actually justifies that. Because there's a lot of misunderstanding on AI. Because and that's why I first would like to start with just a few minutes just to get a little bit of alignment or everybody on the same page on what we're going to talk about. Because artificial intelligence is, of course, a very wide-ranging branch of computer science that's specifically aimed to building smart machines capable of performing tasks that normally require human intelligence. Yeah? So AI by itself is nothing other than a technique to try to replace human intelligence. The way to actually, of course, do that is that they want to do that through machine learning. And artificial intelligence without machine learning, or then subsequently deep learning, is of course something that goes hand in hand. So machine learning is then specifically around an ability of a computer that is fed data and uses statistical techniques in terms of, and then subsequently progressively get better at a task without have specifically been programmed for it. And I think that combination is then hopefully driving us to give us a number of different advantages. And so if I just mention some of these advantages, and I'm just stating them as they've been holistically being recognized. So the advantage of AI is about reduction in human error, it's about available 24/7, it helps in repetitive jobs, it helps making fast decisions, it applies on daily elements, and it allows for new inventions. But at the same time, there are of course also a number of disadvantages. The first and foremost is that it is actually not easy to develop an artificial intelligence platform that makes sense, and that stops us from some of the disadvantages. It also is that not everybody can code, not everybody can work with machine learning. So actually the development of the replacement of human intelligence is actually being put in the hands of a very, very few. And then, of course, the whole question around whether indeed machines could replace human tasks and what the impact is for our own employment. And the last and probably the most important element is the whole conversation around AI and ethics. You mentioned it already, Wayne, that it could drive bias and discrimination. It's also that AI is very often like a substitute word for privacy and surveillance. And last but not least, there's also, of course, this whole difficult philosophical element, philosophical question, which is around what's going to happen to human judgment, and how can you, certainly in the current world, how can you replace human judgment by something that is being programmed by somebody else? So I hope that throughout the 45 minutes that we've left, we're going to touch upon some of these elements specifically in the context of education. Is there anything that either of my 3 panel members would like to add to that element about what AI is and machine learning is, and advantages and disadvantages? Wayne?
The first thing, I mean, you mentioned quite accurately, in my opinion, that that AI is very broad. And I think one of the things that's happened in the past 5 years is that AI has been correlated 100% with machine learning. But actually, machine learning is only one aspect of AI. And the data that's used in those systems, it's important, but it's not the only thing. So I think it's quite important that we don't just associate AI with machine learning. Give you 2 reasons for that. One is that in the world of AI and education, which I know we're going to come on to, the vast majority of tools do not use machine learning. The second point is that a leading AI researcher by the name of Gary Marcus and many other people besides are arguing that machine learning is reaching a ceiling. It's not going to go much further. You know, you can double the amount of data, but that will increase the quality of the recommendations by a few percent. And we've seen that with GPT-2 and GPT-3, for example. And what he's suggesting is that in order for AI to move forward, it needs to bring together some of the various strands of AI, including what they call the good old-fashioned AI, rule-based symbolic AI, together with machine learning. So I think it's very important that we shouldn't just think machine learning equals AI. It's more complex than that.
Thank you very much. I think that's a brilliant addition, and that certainly helps us in terms of clarifying. Can I make the transition to AI and education? And Ali, I would like you to start answering this question, and then subsequently I'll ask Khurram and Dr. Wayne to add to that. Where do you think that AI can significantly add value to education? If possible, share an example of something that's already used or something that you would love that someone invent that for the educational sector.
Yeah, so I think one of the ways in which I, speaking very broadly, want to take the view that AI is not replacing teachers anytime soon. I don't see that that's happening. I don't. You know, this is a separate discussion whether I think that's a good thing or a bad thing. But you know, just to give a couple of instances of that, the U.S. teacher workforce is expected to grow between 5 and 25% for the next 10 years. China and India are expected to grow their teaching workforce by 100% over the next 10 years. So this is sort of emerging economies increasingly taking the onus of educating their children on themselves, as developed economies have done for a while, and you know, so that's the transition that we're seeing. So I think as a supplementary tool to helping teachers perform their job better, that's where I see a lot of hope for AI. Some specific examples of use could be what we call space internal learning, which means students are introduced to a concept today, and let's say they pick 80% of that concept and 20% they missed. So space internal learning is this concept that will give them at different intervals the appropriate information that they may have missed before. This is the principle based on which Duolingo is based. It's not a very smart AI. I agree with Dr. Holmes, but it's the most accessible one. It's one that most people know about. So it's picking your mistakes from before, letting you progress against things that you've already mastered, and reinforcing those mistakes at times when you are least likely to, most likely to grasp them, both as concepts and as things that you've missed.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Khurram, any area where you think AI could or already is adding significant value to education?
So in this room where we have experts, I would say I'm consciously incompetent when it comes to AI, but I've spent some good 20 years in education and helped with my team and people who really know AI much better than I do in getting millions of learners through the systems. And what I can see and what I've learned is the true value of scaling these things in education comes from cognitive research. So it's not in the hard sciences that I see the big value. The big value is when you start, and that's what we've been doing at Area 9, is to collaborate with psychologists, scientists, teachers, people who actually know something about how the human brain works, how memory works. So Ali mentioned spaced repetition as an example. Deliberate practice is another area of cognitive research. And when you start applying some of those learnings from cognitive research that we have built over the last plus 100 years from the psychology domain. So my background is I'm a medical doctor. So typically at those who are medical doctors, they know we get a very hardcore science education, a little bit of the softer side of psychology as well in our education, but not much. So we learn a lot about how the brain is structured, but we don't learn much about how the brain actually works. So I used to teach neuroanatomy in a specific way that teachers teach. But when you combine cognitive research with those findings that Dr. Wayne is also talking about as AI is progressing, but also learning and being humble around the limitations around AI, when you combine those two things, then I think you can start finding something that can really be potentially very beneficial in education. But you have to be extremely humble around what AI alone can do. And I don't believe AI can do much alone in education.
And any specific examples that you've seen, Ali, from your perspective added the most value?
Me or Ali?
Oh, sorry, Khurram.
Yeah. So I think when the best value we've seen is when you get authors, teachers to actually provide pedagogical, well-curated content into an AI platform, whether that's weak or strong AI, let's discuss that later. Then you see tremendous value. So the combination of well-curated, pedagogical, sound content on a platform, that's when we've seen, and I've seen, really, really good results where you actually see students perform better, teachers getting more value out of that system. Yeah. When you don't do that, when you believe that the system in itself will be enough, I think Dr. Wayne probably will tell you as well, you see very, very bleak results.
Okay. Wayne, would you like to build on that and maybe an example from your extended experience where you've really seen value adds through AI?
The problem is I agree with some of what my colleagues have said, but I don't agree with some other aspects. So in terms of, will AI replace teachers? I sincerely hope not, because I think that will make education really, really very poor. But the reality is, and I'm not talking about companies here today, but the reality is most of the AI in education companies, I've heard so many of them speak at conferences, and they will spend the first 5 minutes saying how important the teacher is. And then they'll spend the other 25 minutes of their 30 minutes explaining how their tool is more effective than a teacher. It remembers what the teacher forgets. It identifies what the student doesn't understand. Now, there is some reality in that. There are some situations where an AI tool can remember a lot. But frankly, most of that kind of stuff is done by non-AI. We don't need AI to do most of that. The reality is that the tools are out there, and I could name 30 multi-million-dollar funded companies around the world who are doing this kind of thing. And their argument, in order to, make money and in order to make their shareholders happy, is that their systems are better than teachers. And I think that's nonsense. I think that, the word that Khurram mentioned, to complement as an addition, as a supplement, I think that can be very useful. There is a tool in the US which is marketed essentially as a homework tool. So the idea is the child spends their time in class, in a classroom that we would recognize, and then they go home and they use the tool to catch up, or they're on the bus going home and they can play a game that's AI driven and blah, blah, blah. So, as a supplement, I'm very in favor. As a replacement, I'm very against. And in terms of what have I seen? Well, in my talks, I tend to refer to student-faced AI and teacher-facing AI. And the student-facing AI is the vast majority of where the research has gone and where the investments have gone. So that is a tool that the student directly engages with. And as I've said, I'm not that keen on those. But what about tools that help teachers to be super teachers? So little research has gone into that. But we all carry with us an incredible computer in our pockets in the form of a phone. Why can't we have an AI tool on there that supports teachers? So to give you one example, there is one tool from IBM which allows teachers to say, right, I wish to teach this topic, and quite quickly they can bring up suitable resources. There's another project that colleagues of mine were involved in called XIII Gone, which gives access to open education resources. Now, there's a lot of open education resources out there, and that's both their benefit but their Achilles heel, because you can't find the one you need. Well, XIII Gone uses AI to help you in that process. So there are ways in which it can happen, but with the current crop of AI tools that are used in education, frankly, I'm extremely disappointed.
Wayne, can I just ask a follow-up question on that, and then I'll come back to you, Khurram. On the executive education part, you've got quite a few companies that are able to have significant amount of success with learning experience platforms, etc., etc. Is there any opportunity to use some of the successes that we've seen there also in the educational side, or in the children educational side?
I think I'm challenged by that. I think the reality is that education is a social interaction between knowledge of others and young people who don't have that experience and that knowledge. All the tools that we know of, and including the ones you mentioned, as I say, they're effectively trying to replace the teacher. And I've seen situations where you go into a standard classroom and you've got 30 students, each focused on their own laptop computer, and ignoring the person sat next to them, ignoring the teacher, and just focusing on that. What's the point in that? They're in a shared space called a classroom, and yet they're ignoring everyone around them because they're doing their personalized learning. So I'm not convinced. I think in the training of in professional training, it's different, because professional training tends not to take place in classrooms in the same way. And so if you're on an airplane, you're in a taxi, whatever, and you can get a little bit of support, then that's very different, but I think quite good. Yeah,
understand. Khurram, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, now maybe two things. So let me start with the last thing that just popped up based on what Dr. Wayne said. I think there's two tracks. There's one track where the student is alone. That's a self-paced mode. How can computers potentially help there? And then there is the much more important part where there is a teacher in the room, a blended learning system. And there, totally agree with Dr. Wayne. You need to think about the well-being of the students, the social interaction, and the very probably limited usefulness of that system. So I think definitely when you talk about platforms in education, systems that can cover both, or potentially very well one of them, is important when a school system is looking at systems. So that was one thing. The other thing, I'll again make an analogy where there has been a huge promise but little delivery still, is in healthcare, my own background. If you look at, without mentioning names, but Dr. Wayne, you mentioned one company that has a system called Watson in the end. In medicine, if you ask a lot of researchers and doctors, there's still a lot to be gained from that, right? In personalized medicine. But there's work being done, and a lot of research and evidence that needs to be shown before you actually apply it widely in, let's say, cancer treatments, etc., where Watson is used a lot. We need to do the same in education. We need to set not a high bar, but we need to set a bar similarly as you do in medicine, because we're talking about our kids, right? I don't want to give something to my son or daughter that is affecting their brain that eventually will not be good for them. So we need to, I'm not saying the same regulations exactly as pharmaceuticals companies have, but we need to somehow set standards for how do we measure the effectiveness of tools that, like my company does and others, so that we know what is the play field that we are operating on, and that's totally lacking in education. Right? So we need someone to govern that, not the companies.
Yeah, absolutely not the companies. I understand that. In terms of what to expect over the next couple of years, Wayne, and I would like you to take the lead on this. What are potential steps that we could anticipate in terms of for tools and solutions that become available. So far, you focused it in terms of student focused or teacher focused. One element that I've been reading up about is, of course, AI helping and applications helping, taking away some of the administrative burden of teachers, allowing them to spend more time face to face in the classroom or in interaction with students. What would you see is a roadmap that we can anticipate over the next couple of years?
I think it's challenging. As I mentioned that, over the past 10 years in particular, the vast effort has been on student-facing tools, which, as I say, is about replacing teachers, in effect. I think there are massive opportunities here to do things to support the teachers, to support the students, rather than trying to pretend we can do it instead of the teacher. But as for roadmap, the reality is roadmaps are driven by money people and by policymakers. So, the work I do in UNESCO is trying to demythologize this a lot, and let's look at what actually the systems can do and where they're best used. To pick up on what Dr. Khurram was saying, the number of really good research trials of these tools is, you can count them on one hand. They're very, very, very few. And most of the companies I know, they're not interested in it because it's a big gamble, right? You go into a really big trial only to discover that your system doesn't do what you say. Well, then you're cutting your own legs off. So for the companies, it's a very, very difficult situation for them. But what are the kind of things that we need to be doing? One of the things I think that's come out of the COVID and the school shutdowns, etc., is more people, at least in the beginnings of COVID, were questioning what is the purpose of education. And I think that is a dialogue that we need to have more of. So one of the things in there is the use of examinations. Now, personally, from my pedagogic background and my psychology learnings, etc., I think exams are fundamentally useless. I think they should be removed from the face of the earth. They do nothing. And we should think about, how do we go about assessing and accrediting our young people? Now, I believe in assessment. I believe in accreditation. It's the exams I think are nonsensical. So for many years, I thought, well, could we use AI to do this? If AI is monitoring what the students are achieving in their classroom on a daily basis, could we do it that way? And then one day I realized that by doing that, I was advocating surveillance, which I think is a very bad thing. So I don't think using AI to replace exams in that way is a starter. We're taking one bad thing, replacing it with something that's probably even worse. So is there no way AI can help? Well, I believe there is. We have some incredible professionals. We call them teachers. And these people are incredibly experienced. So why don't we have AI tools that support teachers to make good judgment calls on their students? And they can do that rapidly, quickly, use their knowledge of the student, their knowledge of pedagogy, their knowledge of the subject in question. And in the back end, we have the AI, making sure that this is all happening and it's all normalized across classrooms and normalized across schools, etc. It would be a very straightforward thing to do, but that kind of research is still not happening. We're not investigating it. So that's why we're still stuck with exams. And I suspect one of the reasons we're stuck with exams is because most of the people in charge did well in exams.
I'm pretty sure that's the case indeed. Ali, any views from your perspective? You work in this space. What can we expect in terms of what's your perspective? What we can expect in terms of AI over the next 10 years?
Yeah, so I don't want to, as an idealist, as a teacher, as a school principal, I don't want to limit the potential of, so we're talking about unleashing the potential of AI in education. I don't want to limit that potential by what capitalism is currently driving the research to do. I respect Dr. Holmes' view, and I am worried about it. I'll be very honest. Yes, if you start replacing teachers with computers today, I don't want my kid to go to school like that, right? So, I at the same time, I'm from the generation that saw the social media companies come about, promise a world where everyone would be connected, everything, it would level the playing field for everyone, and so on and so forth. And 14 years later, we're talking about election issues and toppling governments and all of that. So I think I very much agree with my colleague that they should not be regulating themselves, but with the appropriate amount of regulation and the appropriate types of regulation. I think the possibilities specifically in early or K-12 childhood education are endless. So one of the big advantages that AI has over humans is its ability to reduce or remove bias. The initial example of the policing notwithstanding, I'll give a slightly different example. So as when diagnosing children with special needs, which is a little over 20% of the population in the US, for example. We don't have numbers here. A lot of that work was on the subjective ratings assigned by teachers, and removing that subjectivity gives the student an opportunity to be evaluated without bias for the teacher's mood, without bias for the test inefficiencies, without bias for their action on that particular day. Speaking about teacher assisting AI, chatbots today, we're used to chatbots like Siri, we're used to chatbots from Google, we're used to chatbots from Facebook. Could we have chatbots developed by school systems, developed by educational systems that help students do that homework, clear their misconceptions, get prepared for exams, and from the comfort of their home? So another application of AI could be immediate feedbacks. We know students learn best when their feedback is as close to the incident of doing the work as possible. So could computers or could AI step in and fill the gap where it takes teachers, let's say, a week to grade an essay, give more immediate feedback to a student within 5 minutes, have them be able to improve their work when they're still invested in. So I think there are countless applications with the right regulation and with an open mind.
Okay. Thank you, Ali. Anybody would like to build on what Ali just mentioned? Khurram, Wayne?
I agree with a lot of what Ali just said, but there are some things I don't believe AI can grade essays or assignments. It can't. The approaches that are used. I'm not talking about 50 years hence. Maybe they will be able to, but the tools we have now and that are used across some countries to grade students on a regular basis, I personally think it's terrible because those systems cannot. So I work at UCL, and yesterday I finished my grading of my master's students' essays, and I'm thinking all the time, this is tough. I'm finding this really tough, and I do not believe that there is an AI system capable of coming anywhere close to what I was doing. But the problem is, and this is actually something you mentioned earlier, Paul, this notion that if we have AI doing stuff, administrative stuff, then we free the teachers to be able to get on with other work. Well, freeing the teacher, giving the teacher time to do other things, for me is just code for we need fewer teachers. And it doesn't work anyway, because the teachers, you cannot rely upon what the AI is developing, what the AI is saying. And you brought up the issue of judgment earlier, and Ali was essentially saying this as well, that the idea that we're going to allow the AI to make the decisions without any human intervention is frankly absurd. I know it's used. We know the stories of Compass in the US on whether somebody goes into prison or is let out on bail or on parole, and we know the outcomes of that. So I also worry about this notion that AI is not biased, because it really depends. If the data is biased, we know the AI is biased. But even if the data is not biased, then the algorithms, the way they've been written, could well be biased. Now, I was at a conference a while ago, actually, and the Minister of Education for Pakistan was also pointing out that because of the way the systems work, Pakistan is losing all its data, while Pakistanis are using tools that are generated by Google and Apple and Facebook So all the data is gone. So countries are suffering as well in different ways. And the other thing I'd like to mention, this is a big one, which I think is fascinating. So we've seen a lot of writing and complaints about the inaccuracies of AI face recognition, and particularly people who have darker skin tones. And the reality is that, you know, the systems we have today will pick me up and you up, Paul, 100% accuracy. Ali, maybe 95% accurate, right? And a black woman, it's down to about 65% accurate. Now, what I think is interesting about that is that that's actually just a complaint saying, well, the AI is not good enough yet. And it kind of implies that if the AI is good enough, then one day we don't have a problem. But that actually begs the question, even if the AI is accurate, so it's accurately face recognizing people of all skin tones and all face shapes from all cultures and all parts of the world, do we still want AI doing face recognition in an awful lot of places? So we might have accurate systems, but that then brings up the social questions that we also need to address very, very carefully.
But it is also, of course, always related to what we have today, isn't it? So maybe AI is not able to do X, Y, and Z, or maybe AI is biased. But I'm pretty sure that human judgment is also biased, correct? And how do you compare those? How do you compare that? And why would we think that AI is not better than human judgment, where we all know that human judgment is also not flawless? Khurram?
Yeah, so I think that's valid, but I think still, to Dr. Wayne's point, I think we should not work towards a setup in the foreseeable future that leaves out human judgment. Still, we still need to believe in humans are better than robots and systems, and that's how I think that we should build the education systems, not leaving out the teachers' judgments, even not in exams, even if the system could potentially be built to do that, because it also relates to the other huge problem, I think, with the massive investment happening in edtech, driven by VCs, etc. When you don't have a setup where research is being done, you end up the money is spent on marketing and sales, which we are seeing, which is not healthy for the education systems. The money should be spent also on research. Of course, we need to, as companies, talk about what we are building, but that's a big problem. Those two things combined, leaving out human judgment, not having a regulated edtech market is I think very dangerous.
And then probably the third one is that there's very few people who can actually do this, who can actually create an AI that should come close to all. And would you like to put all our faith of human judgment into the hands of those happy few who are going to determine what is right for us as a whole? And how can you prevent that a global company a la Google or whoever is not running away with the solution that everybody else will then need to follow?
Yeah,
sorry,
if I just can input, to Ali's point before, 14 years ago, we put a lot of trust in a lot of the social media platforms, and now we are suffering partly from some of that blind kind of trust. We don't want to do that in education.
Absolutely not. Ali, what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't want to do that in across any application of AI. Look, I watched the movies growing up. I'm scared of AI just as much as the next person. You know, when I was in the US, we received this news that one of the AI divisions in one of the social media companies had to be shut down because the computers had started talking to each other and were having private conversations where they were leaving humans out. This, I believe, happened at Facebook, and that's the sort of scenario that really scares me. Another scenario that really scares me with AI is sort of governments spending their money on students doing sort of AI-based, aptitude-based testing. We have some capabilities to do that even at outclass today. but we can do some aptitude testing that sort of, or let's say the governments are doing some aptitude testing that help identify where their money will be well spent educating a student, and to sort of what extent and for what careers, and which students may or may not make it through whatever the educational frameworks have been set up by that government. What do those types of choices look like for a government? What does the government, let's talk about Pakistan, for example. We have 60 million, 60 million kids out, undereducated today. And we have money for 6 million of them. What does the government do? Who are those 6 million, and what happens to the rest of the 5 million, 55 million, 94, or whatever is left over? That's a lot of kids. So I think those are the types of ethical concerns that I have very, very broadly with AI, as well as specifically to education. And in terms of the tools I think globally I can make the statement that we don't need less teachers. Every education system in Pakistan, in the US, in the West, in the East wants more rather than less teachers, needs more rather than less teachers. They also could benefit a lot from having tools. The technology, frankly, my life is a lot easier as a teacher today than it was 20 years ago. And I think that we can continue to develop those tools, but in the absence of a framework that regulates them very stringently, I'd also say, stick to the side of teachers.
Thank you, Ali.
Wayne, a couple of things there. Firstly, I agree with what my colleagues have said. I think, the biggest thing that's come out recently is, we know about the big tech companies, holding all the power. And when we have, a company like Google, who fires leading members of its ethics committee because those leading members criticized a particular approach that is fundamental to Google's, roadmap, that I think is hugely worrying. And we just allow them to get on with it. The other thing I wanted to point out was with regards the use of the AI in classroom practices and how it can be used to support people in places where there aren't enough teachers. Now, Pakistan is one of those countries. There are many countries around the world where there are not enough teachers. And the obvious answer is, well, we've got these fabulous AI tools. Let's put those in place. Now, in the immediate term, then the truth is that may well help some individual young people today. And that, is difficult to argue against. However, there's a huge problem, because if we focus on putting tools in place that purport to do the job, we're not actually dealing with the real issue. And the real issue is we don't have enough experienced, qualified teachers. So why are we putting tools in that do the job of teachers? It's just going to perpetuate that problem. Instead, we should be developing tools that enable inexperienced, unqualified teachers to become experienced and qualified. That's possible, but it's not sexy. So that's not where the research and the money goes.
So far, we've spoken a lot around the support elements of how AI can support teachers and students. We also talked about the content and the assessment side. I just want to come back to something that Dr. Wayne mentioned around a big part, of course, around being in a class is the social interactions. Are there any examples of how AI can help facilitate the improvement of those social interactions?
So let me go first. So when I was a kid in school, but there's definitely no AI, I was often thrown out of the class in the last 15 minutes because I just occupied the entire classroom by being too active. So there is also a risk in social interaction that you lose the kids that may not be so active. So those students, giving them tools where they can do self-paced learning on their own as well, and then having that compassionate teacher spend time with them, and not Khurram, who actually probably will survive well in the classroom, whether he's inside or outside, right? So I think from that perspective, in the sense that if there are good AI tools, let's have that as a hypothesis, there will be room to help the weaker students potentially.
Okay, yeah, understand. Ali, Wayne, any example of how some of these tools could help in improving the social interaction within, outside of the actual content of what we're trying to teach, or the social interaction? Ali?
I think something that occurs to me is probably something we should have started off with, which is sort of the difference between education and academics. So, an education is very, a very broad umbrella, a very broad spectrum under which I believe and I hope that academics should be one component, and not the biggest component, if you ask me, for what's necessary, within the confines of academics, yes, I think AI can, I believe, I'm convinced, maybe that's idealism, but I believe that AI can really help level the playing field for a lot of students, particularly those with special needs, and especially those who tend to get left behind in traditional classrooms. But what this conversation is doing, it's minimizing the role of a compassionate, caring, loving adult, that really is what your parents hope that you're going to when you leave them for 8 hours a day. So I think I agree with Dr. Holmes, what he said about 40 minutes ago, which is the real conversation we need to be having is what is education? What is the purpose, more importantly, of education? Do we need to, can we hand our children over to computers for their academic components and then pull, parenting needs to make a comeback big time, in my opinion. So is that where we're going towards? What are we paying schools for, and what are we paying governments for? What is the purpose, and what are we asking back? I think society at large, all over the world, not in any one context, would really benefit from having this conversation of what do we expect a school to do when a kid goes from 6 to 8 hours a day, and I think that will help shed a lot of light on what hopes we should keep for AI in the future.
Thank you, Ali. Let's make the loop go round and ask Wayne to complete that his thoughts on that before I maybe take one or two questions from others.
I think again, I agree with the points that have just been made. I think that the reality is that there's not been a lot of work on how we can use AI to support social-based learning, collaborative learning, etc. I know of some research, but it's very, very small. And yeah, it's an area that could be right and could do a lot. But I think it's about thinking about how we think the AI can do this. Now, if we fast forward 20, 30 years, we could conceivably, and this is something that Elon Musk is very keen to pursue, we could conceivably have a neural implant, couldn't we, Khurram? That's the logic. That's what people are pursuing. I'm not saying it's true. It will happen, but that's what people are pursuing. So in a sense, our children are 5 years old and they all have their appointment. They go to the doctor. They get the neural implant. That's it. All the content they'll ever need to know is there. So is that really what we think education is about? Giving them the content in one fell swoop? Or is it about lots of many different things, about social interaction, about learning what turn-taking means, about learning how you work with people, about critical thinking, about collaboration, about all those other complex things? I worry that that's a direction that people are keen to push us in. But I don't know whether it'll happen or not. That remains to be seen.
So I agree with Ali that resetting, that's often what happens when you have an hour to talk about things that start with AI, but we end up actually talking about what is the real important thing. And I think character building and skills, which is more than knowledge, is really where, obviously, that's what we want out of our own kids, right? When they come out of those schools, that they learn about mindfulness, being compassionate, being learning what is empathy, and that I don't think a computer would replace a teacher or an adult human, as Ali you also said. So I think, and to Dr. Wayne's point, there will maybe be that implant soon, 10, 20 years ahead, where at least the content, the knowledge part can be done better than today. But I think it's the other domains, skills and character that is really the purpose of education as well. So I agree with that.
Yeah. And artificial intelligence, certainly if I listen to Dr. Wayne, it's going to it's very far away from playing a role in that particular component, correct?
I think it's one part of the jigsaw. You know, the physical connections between a computer chip and the brain. I mean, there are examples where this is being done today. Its level of effectiveness is very, very low, but nevertheless, there are ways in which, you know, some paraplegics are being given the ability to spell by thinking. Yeah, that research has happened and exists. Yeah. So, you know, it's not inconceivable, but AI is, in terms of it's the underlying software that supports all that kind of work. You know, you can't just have the physical chip. It also needs to run. So it's putting those two things together. But it's not what we think of when we think of AI in education today. I'll give you that. But my point is simply that, you know, if we think education is all about content, then it's either a neural chip or it's a pill that we take. You know, we give it to our 5-year-olds and that's it. We've got all the content in them. But that's not what education is about, as everyone has said, and it's about far more than that. So the question is, how do we use the existing tools to support that rather more complex thing we call education?
Fantastic. We've got 5 minutes left. I've got a closing question. Is there anything else that, on the basis of our conversation, you thought about and wanted to share with the larger group before I start with my closing question? No? All right. Let me do my closing question then. So, should I be excited or should I be scared about AI? As a principal, Dr. Wayne, should I be excited or should I be scared about AI?
If it continues as it is at the moment, I think you should be scared. But if people get involved properly, and by, you know, some of the academics that I mentioned, I like academics get involved. I'm an academic. So I think we need psychologists, we need sociologists, we need educators, we need medics, we need people on the ground to get involved in these discussions. So I do not want Mark Zuckerberg determining how my children are taught. It's as simple as that. It's a much bigger discussion than that, and we need to have that way. So if it's left to Mark Zuckerberg, I'm scared.
Are there enough resources available, both financially as well as intellectually, to have that debate, Dr. Wayne?
Yeah, the possibility's there, but it's not happening.
Okay.
It's not. The money.
Okay. Ali, as a teacher, should I be excited or scared?
I think if you're a teacher that is hearkening for the way things used to be, let's just say 2 years ago, you should be very scared. We're never going back to that ever again. If you're a teacher that embraces change and is excited about it, you should be excited about all the time that you can have freed up. You should be excited about how effectively, efficiently you can give your students feedback, and you can get excited about how there will hopefully be some tools down the line that help you serve your students better, help you understand where each one of them is coming from, to help you meet them rather than waiting for them to rise up to your level.
Thank you, Ali. Khurram, as a parent, should I be scared or excited? I think everybody's scared if Mark Zuckerberg is going to be leading education. So I take that one off the table. Should I be excited or scared?
Yeah, so fundamentally, I'm an optimist. So as a parent of my own 2 kids, I am optimist that the school system that they're in will learn how to, through profound teacher training, which I believe is one of the other conclusions of today's talk here in Denmark. But as a fellow parent, when I think about in Pakistan, other places, emerging markets and countries where we're also active, I hope more than I'm excited, meaning that you need a lot of investment and from governments, from foundations to do it right. And I think we need to help guide everyone who can that development in the future of how do you make sure that education truly doesn't leave anyone behind, that we really make sure that we do our utmost efforts to do it right when it comes to education. And COVID has shown that remote learning, at least in periods of time, is needed, and also in countries where people don't have the resources. Ali spoke about the millions of students that are underserved. So I think there I'm more hopeful than optimist.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We've got to, I think we're done at exactly the time. Thank you very much. I can't even summarize. But I think it potentially, just to add to your point, Khurram, it potentially add another strength to possible inequality around the world in terms of education as well. And there's many other elements already in which inequality is being heightened. So I think I really hope that we get this one significantly better right than many of the other things that we've got wrong. But thank you very much for your input. I think there's a long way to go, but that's what I hear. And what I hear, there's a long way to go in making sure that the most brilliant minds, not from a technology perspective, but from a conceptual and policy perspective, are involved. There's a long way to go in terms of that the money is being spent on that research and on making sure that's being regulated in the right amount. Who's going to regulate is then, of course, another question, because if you get regulators that don't know what they're talking about, then, of course, the regulation is not gonna work either. So I think we are still a couple of steps away from Mr. Zuckerberg or any other AI chatbot taking over our education, and that gives me a lot of relief. I love the fact that we still have teachers, and I think
there are hundreds of schools in the US where Mark Zuckerberg is running it. That already exists. That's nothing new. And Google, as in millions of schools around the world, and they're running it. So this is not, the future. This is now.
All right, so that means that I have to be more worried than I was before. Thank you, Dr. Wayne, for that contribution. Khurram, Ali, Dr. Wayne, thank you very much for being here. I wish I wish you a great rest of the afternoon and morning and listening to the other talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.